We're getting all these things recorded, and we just need to confirm it is going on to the guild. And it looks like it's a go. Okay, make sure the audio is off in the guild. No, artist wake. And live, there we go. Okay, great. We are all set, guys. So, I guess let's get this party started. Thank you, Jon.
All right.
All right, so I got a little bit of a cold, so you'll have to excuse my sniffles. But guys, I want you to welcome Jon Foster. Jon has been in the industry for quite a bit, concept art and a whole slew of things. And hopefully, we're going to really dig into his work and into his process and some of his thinking. And some of the things that he's kind of picked up along the way. But either way, Jon has just had an amazing career. Like I've looked at this work and I've been aware of Jon for a long time. So first off, thank you so much, Jon, for being here and for taking the time.
Sure. My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So tell me.
And thank you for the nice intro.
So tell me, what do you do now? Why don't you just fill us in on what you're doing now?
I still basically the same thing. The freelancing, illustration. Most of my work has been book cover work, science fiction, fantasy, young adult. A lot of young adult, whimsical, magic, fantasy kind of stuff. But every once in a while I was fortunate enough to branch out and do some editorial work, but more like the National Geographic stuff and Scientific American, which I really enjoy, being able to switch things up. And so it's not all just the book covers, or I mean, a lot of the work started in the comic books, and then the paperbacks and novels, and then the more like the National Geographic, Scientific American. And then I did, I have had a chance to do. I've worked in some a gaming studio, small movie studio, and then also do stuff for contract work for HBO and subcontract through Garson Yu and Company for like the intro thing for The Leftovers. Some stuff for MTV, but so it's all over the place. But most of it really is book cover.
That's great. So why don't we throw some artwork up so people know who you are, what you do? Do you have an art station, or where do you?
I have some. Let's see. The presentation here, and there's a bunch here, but we can go through it faster and slower. Kind of in the beginning. This was actually early on, the beginning of the career. It's one of the things that got some interest and got jobs for me. And then these are some of the earlier pieces, and even early on, I started in my career. I was painting with oils and then using digital Photoshop to do a lot of finishing. There's a lot of Photoshop in this one,
right?
But these go back about 20 years ago, and but so those were book covers, except for that robot piece, which is a personal piece. This was some of the stuff for that small movie studio. It was in Italy, and we were making a film on. It was going to be a 3D animated or computer animated film on Anne Frank, and I was doing some concept work and some storyboard work. I worked at Turbine Games for a few months. Oops, let me just turn that off. Sorry.
Yeah.
For a few months, doing environment kind of concept stuff.
Yeah.
Some of the advertising work. This is more recent. That this was, doing jobs you love and then doing jobs that you don't particularly love. It's all kind of part of the game at times. And trying to convince yourself that you're enjoying it in some way or another, because this actually is goes on a bus stop. It was in Russia. It'd be on bus stops in for Friskies treats, Whiskas or whatever. So cat treats.
Got
Oh,
it.
I forgot about doing it's like a matte painting for a McDonald's commercial. Well, it was an online commercial.
Yeah.
And some of that kind of advertising work, the National Geographic work, some of it. This was early for me getting started, was doing a lot of role-playing game books, the interiors. That would be like 20 years ago, before the getting the book covers. And this isn't quite sequential or chronological in terms of this, but this was tons and tons of this stuff that got me in good with the art director, and I enjoyed doing the work. It didn't pay very well, but I wasn't working towards the pay scale. I was working towards just the best I could do. And then some cover work would come after, like this later on for Dragon magazine. And this was oils. Actually, this one was finished digitally, but I actually finished it in oils after that too.
Oh, how'd you talk to me about that? You paint it digitally and then you do the whole thing over again in oil, or?
Well, I did know I painted it in oils, and it was mostly done, about 80% done in the oil. But the carps on the carp pattern on the banner wasn't painted in, and some of the swords weren't painted in, and so I did that digitally, and then after the fact, I wanted to show the painting and see if I could sell it, so I finished it.
Nice.
And yeah, that happens a bit. This one, beginning of some of doing, because I was mostly doing the science fiction fantasy stuff, but then getting into the young adult stuff, which really turned out to be more of my forte than like more hardcore science fiction or fantasy.
Okay.
So the young adult books, but still, always every once in a while getting something. This was through Wizards of the Coast, their I Strahd character. Some of the science fiction editorial for Tor.com. And I'm just cruising through these because I can, we'll probably have other things to talk about, but just to give an idea of the stuff I've done in the comic books, the Star Wars comic books, the DC Vertigo, that was Tim Hunter, The Age of Magic. Something I did with Dave Dorman, one of his stories. It was a series, a young adult series at Tor. More. This was the first National Geographic piece that I did. And it was all digital. And I got my ex-wife is in there. My friend Lars, Lars Grant West, also another fantastic artist. And then all of the guys, actually that are caught and probably going to get sacrificed, those are all me, except for I don't look like that. It's one of those things about using reference and changing your reference, and it's like a starting point, but then being able to expand upon it.
Nice.
These books, comic books and books. Buffy. Buffy was very difficult to work on, actually, because I'm not very good at likenesses, and they really did want likenesses. So this is some more recent work, and this actually involves a lot of past few years more ZBrush and Keyshot and working them in, because actually all of this was made in ZBrush.
Oh wow! Even the background, or just the character?
The background too, and I the words on that's all Photoshop and using Puppet Warp, but yeah, the shapes. So more Dragon Age poster. So I have gone around, not incredibly far stylistically, but I have gotten an opportunity to experiment stylistically, and which is kept me happy
Yeah.
and interested, and I think it's an important thing. And um, there's more recent National Geographic. This was a cover for Scientific American pretty recently. Going back into some of the other stuff, this was just, some things are just for fun. But I don't. I think there's so many in here. I'll just kind of cruise through.
This is great actually to sit and walk through this and see kind of, what you were working on and for. So this is really great introduction of your work. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I sometimes I spend too much time, especially when you start talking about individual pieces. This was for Playboy, actually. So I forgot I did. There's only one so far for Playboy, but it was their idea of all the college football team mascots in a fight club situation.
Nice.
Yeah, it was fun. But I have been able to experiment compositionally and a little bit style wise, but compositionally probably more so with some of the art directors. So I've been pretty fortunate that way. But this is the thing for the leftovers. It's a massive piece. Most of it was worked on the vignettes individually and assembled later because it had to have such resolution because they zoomed in close on it.
Uh-huh.
So it just, I had to use that special file prefix in Photoshop for files that are, I don't know, gigabytes.
I remember seeing this actually when I can't remember where I was watching Netflix or Leftovers, if it was Hulu or something like that. But I remember seeing this and I was just like, oh my god, it's just one of the most beautiful intros.
Oh, thank you. I was happy how it turned out and everything. And Garson, you and company, they were great in putting it all together in that subtle little animation. And the music was, of course, just beautiful. But by the way, a lot of this was made in 3D, and ZBrush.
Yeah.
For the reference. This was the Teen Wolf promo, a kind of promo poster piece that they used online.
Yeah.
And some stuff for Sideshow Toys, not quite as sweet. Other editorial things, Sideshow Toys again. I do some of the fine art prints that they make, after, mostly it's the collectible statues, but they do sell limited edition prints, and I've done a few of those. I'd say I'm probably most happiest when I'm able to do something more like this, a little bit goofier, storytelling wise, not complete realism. Well, this was a little process in terms of working on thumbnails and sketch ideas. It didn't happen, but process of thinking about, I had to do something for each at that time, each of the movies. And it was going to be like a DVD box set of the 5. So Prometheus being the 5th one. And so each one was, as you see, like Alien 1, 2, 3, 4. So they were going down, they were different solutions, and going across, we're trying to keep kind of a family or theme to them. The heads, her head in Alien 4, her and the beast, and then Prometheus, the navigators or architects. And then the other one, trying to keep with themes going across for each. And I had lots of different ones for working out. So this here, in terms of working out thumbnails and ideas, these are more than thumbnails because they would be at least legible by the art director. But so there is a good representation of the work that I've done.
That's
I
great.
do. And
that's great. So tell me about your education, because you're spanning the 2D and 3D. So and you've been at this game for a bit. So talk to me about your education. Like where'd you go to school? Where'd you get started?
I went to, well, it I didn't go to art school right away. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I wasn't a very good high school student, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, and so I did go to a local college after graduating high school, but after a year and a half without any real direction, I left, and I was still living at home with my father, and he's a military man. He says that's fine, but you got to get a full time job and pay a little rent, which wasn't anything terrible, but so it's fine. So worked full time and for a year and thought about what I wanted to do and reapplied to schools. And uh, so I reapplied and decided that I wanted to go to art school. I'd always liked art, but I wasn't the art kid in high school.
Uh-huh.
And my art teachers actually hated. Well, probably just because I was an obnoxious kid. I mean, I wasn't precocious. I was more just um, just argumentative kind of
Fair enough.
thing.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and so, but I didn't get into some of the schools. I didn't get into Rhode Island School of Design or the one I wanted to, but I got into Parsons in New
Uh-huh.
York, but under academic probation. That's how not that's how my portfolio wasn't looking that good and my grades weren't that good, but I went for a semester and then I decided to apply myself. But by that time I was 21, 22. And so applying myself, I did get on the dean's list, and I didn't actually like being in New York, so I reapplied to Rhode Island School of Design and got in, and that's where I ended up going to school and finishing. And I graduated around when I was 25. I was 25. I was in '89.
Yeah.
Um, and But even then, I was not a stellar student. I wasn't one that was going to go out and get work right away. As a matter of fact, it took me about 8 years after graduating before I was making a living as an illustrator. And there was a couple of teachers that there was one teacher that told me I had to work very hard for mediocre results. And it was pretty devastating.
That's
It was pretty devastating, but I guess I had the youthful and willful ignorance, or just being able to look past certain things, or a certain, maybe someone else's reality, and try to make my own
yeah.
and stick with it. But it did take time too. And um and I still sometimes look back and wonder, oh, I, as many people, have the whole imposter syndrome
Mm.
uh, feeling, which, if you guys aren't familiar with that, it is basically that this you've it's only been luck that you have had any success that you've had at this, whatever you're doing, and people don't know it yet, but they could find out, or it'll just come crashing down, you know.
I think we're all pretty familiar with that one.
Right,
That's
right. So
pretty
I didn't know if they were familiar with the term, but yeah, there is a clinical psychological term for it, imposter syndrome. Um, so yeah, and I still actually feel that, but at times. Uh, so it was even years after. I think my career started basically right around when I was 33.
yeah.
I'm 50.
Okay.
I'm 50. I'm 54 now, and so it's been good, solid 20 years.
That's great. So, in between turning 25 and graduating and your career starting at 31, must have been a lot of things happening in there. Did you know right away that you wanted to do illustration and covers and things like that, or?
Yeah, no, that's actually a great question, because when I graduated, I thought I should be an editorial illustrator, because that's basically what RISD is. The idea of high concept, the visual pun, smart illustration
Uh-huh.
was it's you know Brad Holland is a great example of that, right? And there's many, but to be an editorial illustrator was what everybody was pushing and thinking in the pinnacle. But I wasn't. I wasn't. So I tried, but I was rather dark in my work, and it wasn't that witty in terms of the visual play that
Hmm.
way. And so I had a reassessment shortly after that, that's when I started saying, when I got interested in art in my teens. I mean, I was interested in art as a young kid, right? You're drawing, and my mother drew and sketched and had art projects, and I would sit down and draw with her sometimes, and I was drawing like most everybody since you can remember. Um, but the idea of science fiction and fantasy book cover work, when I was in my teens and reading the stuff, that was there and strong, but I kind of put it aside and thought, well, maybe it's juvenile or something like that. And
Mm.
I'll be a more adult editorial illustrator. But then when I just realized that I wasn't going to be an editorial illustrator, or maybe I wasn't even that interested, it's like I had to ask myself, what do I really want to do? What was I really getting into art and going to art school for?
Mm-hmm.
And it was for the comics, the science fiction, fantasy, and so I started remaking portfolios and going to small sci-fi conventions with very very little success,
Mm-hmm.
if any. But over the years, trying and practicing and practicing and practicing. So that was it. And of course, there were jobs. I worked at an art store, for several years. That was the full-time job, and then um, then that the store closed down, working at Staples and working at a library, other kinds of retail jobs and stuff like that to try and make ends meet as much as you could.
Yeah.
And so it was, maybe that's why I kept at it, because I had a lot of jobs I really didn't want to do.
That's nice. Yeah, that
It was
works.
incentive. Yeah, it was incentive. Uh, and so, you know, I just, so painting and trying and redoing. It's not like I painted 24/7. I mean, there were times when there wasn't, the fear in the beginning was a big problem. Fear to start the process, fear that you'll be frustrated during the process, or feeling like only at the tail end of a painting when it looks like it's coming together and looking good that you can enjoy it.
Mm.
That was, it seemed like a mistake. Well, it is in retrospect, but it would keep me from starting things or procrastinating. Um, and later on, when I worked with Rick Barry for a couple of years, just together in his house, just kind of a camaraderie thing, and he talked a lot about the process, and it was about the process, and the whole process was exploring and finding, and even if it wasn't pretty, through it, but the whole thing was like you're moving paint around, colorful mud. If it goes
Uh-huh.
back to being a board, if it goes back to being a board, it goes back to being a board. Nothing is really lost. You've learned something, even in something that doesn't seem to be success. And in that very first painting was one of the experiments I did that he advocated for this painting. He had advocated doing abstract work, and I actually advocate for it too, just playing with media and values and shapes and stuff. But I was still kind of stuck with wanting to make a painting. But at least it didn't have people in it. It had a robot that I could be whatever, right? And it was just about value, very simple values, and almost monochromatic in shape, and playing with that. And this painting was an eye opener. I had fun through the whole thing. And I realized the whole process is what I want to enjoy. And that made a huge difference for me. I still have to remind myself of that nowadays. It's not like that was it and you just go forward and never have that mistake again. But it is a good reminder, and I try to remind everybody to enjoy the whole process.
That's
That's
a
why you're doing.
Yeah, that's a fascinating um, thing to talk about because for many of us, especially, and maybe you'll relate to this, like when we're first getting ourselves started, there's so much learning, right? It's like we got all the anatomy problems, we got all the, there's just this is wrong, this is wrong. There's a million things that are wrong. So how do you enjoy that process? And is it something that you only enjoy once you've reached a level of mastery, which is what many of us might think?
Right, but it's not. It is, at least for me. It wasn't. I don't know that I'll ever reach a level of mastery. I mean, it's an ongoing process, and one of the things is being honest with myself and being open to that, and is the idea that you don't get to a certain plateau of, or a pinnacle of something, and there you are, and you just sit, and it's
Yeah.
fine. For one, for one thing, you wouldn't want to. You'd be bored. You'd be looking at the next mountain that you could climb.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing is, it just doesn't work like that. You lose some things, you gain some things. Life changes. You want to experiment. You want to stay actually. Part of it is career oriented. You want to stay viable and a little bit on the edge so that you are useful, I guess, to art directors. And the other thing would be, to not, if you, it seems to me that it's almost kind of over if you just have a formula and you stick to that formula and you always get the same results.
Right.
And then there seems to be no more exploration, and there's no more surprises, and there's no more learning. And I think life is about always learning. And so, I mean, the fact that I have to remind myself to enjoy the process, or that, that I have to remind myself that, maybe I'm not an imposter, that this stuff doesn't go away. You learn to deal with it better. You learn to understand it better. You understand yourself better. You're more honest with yourself. And in that, you're actually growing.
Yeah.
Um,
What do you say to yourself when you have that imposter syndrome kind of creeping up? You can feel that you're, you know,
oh, sometimes I'll, well, I mean, to be honest, and I should be,
yeah.
is I'll look at my work and say, well, no, you did this stuff. You did do this stuff. It can't be just a mistake. So I have a history that I can backtrack on and look at,
Mhm.
and in the beginning, maybe if you don't have that history, I guess I don't guess it would be more difficult, but you're trying to make it. But the other things, that, and the other thing is, I just kind of say, well, on what I do is not so much as in general, I just say, well, I'm just wasting my time.
Mm.
I mean, it's not so easy. You don't just turn it off by doing that, but you do a realization that, well, this is not going to get you anywhere. You're already working at being better. You're already working at being honest with yourself to make your improvements, kind of having something negative that's not provable, and is more of an insecurity, bouncing around in your head. Identify it. It's negative. There's really no positive benefit from it. I'm glad that people are, you can be glad that you are, you're not egotistical, you're not narcissistic, or, overly so, and thinking everything you do is great, because that's blind. That's a certain kind of blindness too. So part of that imposter syndrome is part of questioning yourself and questioning what you
Mhm.
do still.
Yeah.
And in those questions are growth. And so it's not like, uh you know you don't get rid of it completely. You just can't dwell too much in it, obviously, because you won't get anything done. um and that's happened to me too. I mean, ideas of depression or stressful times, I don't actually produce more during, if I'm depressed or have stressful times. I produce less. I'm not like a tortured artist that produces. Actually, most artists that I talk to, when they are in a bleak place, they're not producing. It's
Mm.
after that you are, kind of thing. Um, so, um, through my childhood and young adult life, I dealt with a serious case of OCD, and just being that the case that, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, and just the case that it was actually in the 80s and 90s, early 80s and up until the 90s. Starting in the 90s, they got a better handle. It's not that complicated of a disorder, but they didn't really know what to do with it in the 80s. And what are the cognitive or behavioral, I won't go into any further, but basically I had no idea. I just thought that I was totally a mess, and
Uh-huh.
life was going to really suck. And so there was that kind of depression going on then, and I wasn't making any art.
Yeah, yeah,
I wasn't making any art.
I totally get that. So, what did you do different when you started this piece? Because this is the piece that you said really got you going, and this is the piece, first piece that you really enjoyed doing. So, and this is a piece that I think most of us are familiar with. This piece, it
Yeah,
was on Spectrum in the
yeah.
magazine, and so what did you do different? Did you think about it different? Did you like sit in a different place? What was
Well,
different?
there are some concrete things about this and in the process that was a little different.
Uh-huh.
Um, I did go in armed with the idea of I'm not going to fret over what this looks like through every step or what it will be when completed. I will play with the paint. I will redo brushstrokes or I'll scrape away at brushstrokes. I will experiment. I will see what happens. And I'm not going to direct this to a certain perceived point. And this actually is true for my work to this day. I don't have something that I think it should look like in my head that I work towards. The piece can take left hand, right hand turns, do a 360, whatever. It's going to go where it goes. Now of course I do have to manage that in terms of it being for a job, but I let the piece grow from where it is at that moment and not direct it to be an expectation of it to be something at the end. So that's a big point right there. Is to explore through the process and be open for changes and revisions and being willing to make changes and revisions. Um, the other part was that I did, this is a very much more objective sense of change. Was I just limited my palette. The palette on this was phthalo blue, burnt umber, probably, well, white, of course, black, probably, um, and that would probably be it. There might be like a like a sienna or some maybe a earthy yellow, like an ochre, a little bit in there, but basically I kept a very monochromatic palette, which is something that I still do, and even with my digital work, which I actually do in black and white. Uh, for the most part, I don't start adding color in until later on, because color for me just it's another variable that throws me for a loop
Mm.
and I get frustrated. So if I can work monochromatically, then it's about values and shapes. And then I can explore and explore and explore with values and shapes. And it's my happy home. And so limiting the palette was a big deal.
That's great. I
Um,
remember hearing Odd Nerdrum would have his students copy in black and white, his paintings.
yeah, I didn't know that, but that's a lot when I do teach some, and I'm a good half of the semester is about value and shape
Mm.
and composition and that. So even nowadays, I'll be working things up to a pretty finished extent, not completely finished, but uh, I don't know, get like maybe 80% finished or something in the value stage,
Yeah.
and then I'll start adding color in. Color, by the way, color is just not one more variable. It's actually like three when you have hue, saturation, and the value of the color itself too. So it's like so many other variables, to throw into this that I needed to simplify. Yeah.
That's great. Okay, so in for this painting, if I summarize, the key thing is you limited the problems you were solving. You went into it and you decided, I'm just going to play, and you committed to, the process of just, playing. And
Yes.
and that's something that I heard you say earlier too, because you were talking about how you deal with that imposter syndrome. And one of the things I heard you say is, at a certain point you just realize you're wasting time because you're committed to the process of creating. Like, what are you going to do? Are you going to, go get an
Right.
executive job now? Like, the point is you're going to be an artist. That's it. So stop wasting my time with doubt.
Right. Yeah.
I love that.
That's very good. I like the way you put it too, in terms of like, what are you going to do? Be an accountant? Uh, no, nothing against accountants, but not for me. I wouldn't, so it's you, and this, a lot of this it comes with years and maturity, and everything is newer and scarier when you're younger because of its newness, and after dealing with this, over the years, you kind of you see a pattern, you understand a pattern, and you might even have a little bit more willpower to be a little bit more honest with yourself about, you know these, you know certain aspects with it. And it's not like honest with myself like I suck. That's not it. It's more honest about why you have this fear, you know and what is this fear. It's probably more of an insecurity, or a hesitation for some reason.
Hmm.
And why are you hesitating about it? Because there's other reasons for those hesitations and fears. Then it's not like I suck. It's other stuff. And being able to kind of look at yourself and address those things will just send you down the road to, making art again.
That's great. And I was thinking, you've probably seen some artists come in, be really strong, and burn out. Because you've been teaching for a bit, you've been in the illustration industry, and so what do you think an artist really needs to do to be successful and not burn out, or just eventually go back to flipping burgers, or become that accountant? Maybe
Right.
you've seen people do that. I certainly have.
Well, I think this would definitely depend on that artist, but ones that I've seen that have been incredibly talented, they kind of come in burning bright and early,
Yeah.
and I think, and I'm not sure, but a theory on it is that I think it might be too easy for them, um, and that they're not working at it. They can't have an appreciation, I think, for maybe even the excitement and the appreciation for growth and development and getting better. There's something about when you get better and you do another job, and you can tell, in your own growth, and it's looking better. There's something incredibly exciting and addictive about that.
Mm.
And having to work for something makes it that much more important to you. If you're not having to work for something, it's so much easier to just, like, throw it aside. And
Mm.
I don't mean to disparage anybody that just kind of burnt out on art or anything like that, because that would be sad in itself. But maybe coming too easy, and losing interest, or not having that, because it was easy, there wasn't really a drive behind it in the first place. So a lot of good artists that I know, it wasn't particularly just easy for them. There's a lot of drive and working at it, and a lot of passion about getting better and painting,
Mm.
and learning. And I think that's a very important part. So the idea that some of us might feel insecure about not being, like, right out of Zeus's head, fully formed, that, that's what we're supposed to be. But I don't actually think that is. And you have heard, and there's a lot of truth in the saying of, genius is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. Um, so that perspiration, that's where I'm living. Not saying I'm a genius. I'm just saying that I'm still working at the perspiration part.
That's great. I remember reading something from Bo Bartlett, the painter,
Yeah,
and
I know. Yeah, I love his work,
I
actually.
do too, guys. So beautiful. And he said that his sister was actually a better draftsman. She was a better artist than he was when they were growing up. But she didn't take it anywhere. But he, you know, this became something that was really important for him to grow, to get better, to achieve
Right.
something there. And then, of course, look where it's landed him.
I believe that, and I'm sure you've shown your students his work, since you mentioned them, because it's really beautiful, fascinating work, and I like it. There's a certain mood to it that's, it's not photorealism, it's
Mm.
naturalism or realism, but it's got something else to it mysterious, which I really like.
Yeah.
But it's, often saying Greg Manchess is not he's not an advocate of the idea of talent. Like, oh, you have talent, like you were born with talent. He doesn't think that is it, and I have to agree with him in my thoughts on it, because people weren't going to be saying, originally, as I said, my teachers weren't saying that, you have this amazing talent. But I think what happens, what creativity or what we might be calling talent is an interest, right? So you're interested, very interested. Then you're also passionate about that interest. So you're going to spend that time looking and developing and wanting to do things about that interest. And then you're also, and not, hopefully not a too unhealthy of a way, you're slightly obsessed. And so all of those things pooling together have you working at something and practicing something and practicing something. And art, by the way, really, really can relate to practice and training the same way that you do with sports. There's, I think we don't think of it that way. I think we do at times, as if we draw more from life, we'll get better. But it really is like that. Practice more. The more you run, a little bit and practice and train smart and look at other things and eat right or whatever, you're going to run farther, faster. And the same thing with art is a matter of getting there, practicing. And that is a nice, concrete, objectified way of getting better.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
sometimes it just seems mysterious to us, but that part isn't. It can be more mysterious when we start talking about personal voice, of course, because that's so very subjective and comes with life lived and maturity, and that is always developing. But
Yeah. And Bo Bartlett's a good one for that, because you said he has that mystery. And then if you look at it, some of his paintings, you can see he's pulling straight from early American, what do they call it? Nativism? Forget
yeah,
what they
regionalism. You
regionalism, yes.
like Grant Wood.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. I didn't think of that before, but that's a very pertinent point. Yeah, if you think Thomas Hart Benton, Grant Wood,
Uh-huh.
and those are the two that I know, like the regionalists. But yeah,
And going back even further, I remember there was some of the first painters in America. There was one scene of Bo's where he's got this woman holding a handkerchief and all these people behind her. And there's a similar painting of a guy in a raft, and they're doing the same kind of thing. But he's got this
oh yeah,
very early American. George Bingham, actually Bingham.
oh
So we're talking like 1830,
right, right.
and
I'll have to look that one up. I'm not
yeah,
familiar with that.
I forget what they call it. It's before regionalism, because it was after Thomas Hart Benton was a bit after that.
Right, yeah, he was in the maybe 30s and 40s, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
and yeah,
yeah, I was gonna say, so this idea of finding your voice, of this mystery, I think is something that really permeates what we do, and even in the CG world. So when I hear you talk a lot about, like, there's this uncertainty, there's a lot of, you want to discover. If you found it, then it's already done, right? You're not interested in it anymore. Like, you're interested in the discovery process.
right. But I never. Well, there could be theoretically that danger, but I never really feel like I've discovered something and completely,
Mm-hmm.
and figured it out. I never have that. I get like slight successes, or partly, partial successes or something in the exploration. So it hasn't been a problem of, say, setting forth a task and discovering and figuring it out, then needing to move on. It hasn't been that linear for me.
Yeah, but there is, like, for you, you find joy in the uncertainty of things, as opposed to, somebody who might find joy in the certainty.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's a very good point too. Well, I had to, I think I trained myself, or at least tried to convince myself, that there can be joy in the uncertainty, uh, at least in the art process, um, that because it was going to be there. And otherwise, if I didn't, embrace that uncertainty and find a joy in that, then I was going to be avoiding making art.
Hmm.
So I guess, and so it is, we're not all the same. So there might be other things in the process that cause you guys to hesitate or to procrastinate, and asking yourself what that is. It may not just be one thing either, of course, but what that is. By the way, a person, a friend of mine, talked to me about. We talked about procrastination, and oftentimes we think of it as laziness,
Uh-huh.
but it's not. Procrastination is a resistance. There's a resistance to doing something. What is that resistance? And asking yourself that, fear, schedules, time, something else that you should be doing first, or you think it'll expose you to. Well, fear can cover so many different things, right? In terms of my ability, or if I don't do this well, then how do I make a living? And or all across the board, or
Totally.
my self-worth is all tied up in this. But so fear is a big one that encompasses a lot. But asking yourself what that is in your process, um, you know, maybe fear is getting lost in the process. I am okay with getting lost in the process. Maybe you are not, and that's part of it. But so asking yourself, instead of saying I procrastinate, I'm lazy, is I procrastinate because there's resistance. What is that resistance?
Mm. That's great. I remember a moment. I had an artist who, in the early days of starting the company, I had an artist come and stay with me for a while. I was going through some personal stuff, and I was watching him work, and I was like all in. I was in my business brain at that point. There's like 20,000 things I had to do, and I had to teach, and I had to make sure everything was flowing correctly. And so I'm over here in one room creating these tutorials and this artwork, and everything's like very achievement focused. There's no breaks. Try to get everything done in 15 minutes. Change your energy. Do it again. Do it again. And then I'd come out of the room and I'd see my friend, and he'd be like alternating between TV and the and working on some sculpt. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking to myself, like, how'd this guy get so good? He's the laziest bastard I've ever seen in my life. What the hell is going on with this guy? But then at the end of the day, his work was like 20 times better than mine. Because he's chill.
Yep. He's relaxed with it, and that's definitely a big part of it. He's chill with it, and the other, there is a thing in terms of creative work. You were doing a different kind of work at that time, and
Hmm.
if he was doing that kind of work, he you stick to it, and there's hours of it. But creative work, when you're in the middle of it, is actually incredibly taxing. And you maybe 3 hours at a stint is you know is good, but
Hmm.
not much more. It's not to say that you don't just work 3 hours a day, but the creative stuff that's you're fretting, you're working, you're exploring, and hopefully having fun, not just fretting. But in doing that, you can get pretty burned out in 3 hours. You need to take a break, and a lot of there's a lot to be said about the zoning out time, half asleep time, even watching TV time, especially TV that you're just zoning out on.
Yeah.
They say because it gives your mind a break to expand, and you're actually thinking about the things you're doing a little bit going on in there. What if I do this? What if I add this? What if I do this?
Yeah.
If you give yourself the room to reflect on what you're doing by also giving yourself some recuperation time, and you come back for another 2 hours or something like that, or you could do busy work, you could do the business work, because that's a different kind of mental work that you're doing, not just the creative work, so um, but bouncing around and giving yourself a chance to reflect on what you're doing and zone out is actually very important uh, in the creative process.
Yeah. That's great. There's this great book by I think it's Daniel Coyle called Talent Code. I think it was the book Talent Code. I've read a few, so I'm a little fuzzy on which is which. But he talks about this one snowboarder. Oh no, it was Rise of the Superman by somebody else, and he talks about this snowboarder who's like lives in where they're training for the Olympics, and there's all these skiers training for the Olympics there, and he does just off to the side of the main slope where everybody's training. He goes in and he pulls off this like I think it's a 5 axis, it's a 5x360 kind of stunt. He's just sitting there doing this, and he pulls off this stunt that none of the people training for the Olympics can do. And he's not training for the Olympics. He's just some dude. He's alternating between his going out there having fun and then getting stoned and
Right.
sitting on the couch.
Right.
And that's
Right.
what he does. But he goes off and he achieves this massive physical achievement that people who are waking up at 6 and eating 2 eggs in the morning, they're not able to achieve.
Right. There is physical, the physical abilities can be, a little bit different than the creative ones in terms of, when we come to ability, someone is taller than me or something like that. But this is more of a creative and practice thing, but also being relaxed with it. So actually finding his joy in it, not performing in a sense, he's performing for him to enjoy it. And in that joy and in that work, in that relaxed state, he's able to, experiment and, with his body and the feel and push things. And he's not trying to impress someone else. Now with art, that's another big one, is we're constantly, it's part of the game, is you want to work for a company and you want to be an illustrator or whatever it is. You want to impress other people. You want people to like it, of course. But when you start working, when that voice is in the back of your head about like, I need to practice to get better so that people will look at this and not think I'm, a imposter, and that can get in the way. That's one of those voiceovers, you're from your left temporal lobe that really gets in the way of enjoying a creative process, and it's all kinds of shutdown can happen with that in terms of frustration, because you're doing it for the wrong reason.
Mm-hmm.
And so in doing it for the wrong reason, you can get better and do things, but the idea of doing it for you, that's why I'm just so much about this whole idea of playing with the art and enjoying the process. And so in doing it for you, you'll, for one thing, you'll just love what you're doing. Why take something you loved what you're doing and wanted to learn how to do better to make a living at it, and then all of a sudden make it more of a job?
Yes.
And then, so, why do that? So learn to still love what you're doing. You, of course, I want people to like what I do. It's still there, but that's one of those things. Is kind of like, I realize that voice is stronger at times. And when it does get stronger, it makes me hesitate, makes me procrastinate, makes me get frustrated, makes me second guess each brushstroke I'm putting down. And I don't want to do that. I mean, you shouldn't do that. You don't get anywhere with that. Nothing happens. So you have to identify it, sometimes I'm better and sometimes I'm not very good at, calming it down. But the first step is identifying that, why am I doing, what am I doing this for? Why am I stressed? I'm trying to impress. And, but we see with that snowboarder, I think that his performance and what he's doing is indicative of him doing it for himself. Yeah.
That's great. So what do you think are the mistakes that artists make when they're thinking about their career and they're thinking about whether or not they're going to be able to actually do this? What do you think are just some of the mistakes that they make in terms of the mental game? Because we spent a lot of time talking about the mental game, which I personally think is the more important game. But what are the mistakes that you think people make starting out?
I don't know. I will explore this a bit. I'm drawing a blank right now.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the mistakes, I think.
Like one of them we're thinking is, yeah, go for it.
Well, the mental game is worried whether I can do this. I think oddly, even with my own insecurities, I had this kind of ignorance in a sense of like, yes, I can do this. And in the very beginning, I just wanted to be able to get some work, and and I wasn't I think I'm glad in the beginning I wasn't thinking I would be, reasonably well known for what I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was more like I just need to get better so that I could get a job here or there, and start making a living, kind of thing. So I, you know, so there was that, and there was also that kind of willful, blissful ignorance of like, sure, I can do this,
Yes.
and staying with it. Of course, there was other self doubts going on with it, but I think just plowing ahead, and doing it was. But I haven't seen. The thing is, I'm not maybe not in tune enough with what's going on in the industry and people finding work or not finding work, that I think is the mistake. Possibly in this, I could step on some toes here. I, it's in the industry, say like the game industry, um, when there is maybe not understand the gaming and movie or the concept, let's say the concept, the previs and uh, part of the industry, that there is a lot of this is what's out there and this is what they'll want to see, and there's going to be a repetition of of style and work and look, and that and in doing that, that kind of makes you a dime a dozen,
Mm-hmm.
instead of more of the shiny penny that stands out. um and so that's one thing. The other would be not understanding the concept industry, in full. That a lot of the representation of the concept is more flashy than the reality of the teamwork and the grunt work of, you know, everybody working on something, pulling that together, having the meeting and editing these things out, going back and in the same day and revising under, with the art direction, and that it's not, it's not all Craig Mullins looking, illustration kind of
Right.
things.
Yeah.
And understanding that, and maybe your portfolio of just finding work in the beginning isn't, if you don't have that sense of reality of the work situation, uh, that would be another one. But I haven't, I haven't, I think the only other thing I see if someone in terms of maybe trying to find book cover work and their portfolio is just not up there yet, but I also sense a kind of resistance in the person for change,
Mm-hmm.
where they're still thinking, no, this is. I mean, they're not being that belligerent, but you can tell there's still a resistance of like, no, this should be good enough. This is good enough, but they're not. But they're not getting work, and they're not making those changes. Um, you know, and that would be one of them. But I don't, that mentality. I mean, I've even had that mentality when I was younger, kind of thing, is like, well, this should be good enough, why not? um but it's not. And then being able to change, being able to say, okay, I'm not good enough yet, and not, well, you don't just sit here, okay, I will change, but go back and practice more and try and do things a little bit differently.
Yeah.
But I'm coming up a little short on any other mistakes. Do you have anything in mind?
No, that was great. The idea of being too tight and and all of that. Let's do this. So we're right there at an hour. Thank you so much for taking the time and for walking us through some of your art and thinking this through. I want to open this up to about 2 questions for you guys, and you got to start typing fast. So for those of you who are watching, either place Andrew or I think is over there on the guild and the system, and those you guys who are in GoToMeeting. Um, let's throw some questions up there. Give me a better question than that, Jon. That's a little. I'm not quite sure how to. I don't want to phrase a negative. Okay. All right. So for me, the key takeaway from this has been this concept of exploration and discovery as kind of one of the core foundational um, processes for your work.
I can also, in it, just briefly show you,
Yeah.
uh, because in terms of that idea of the exploration,
Mm-hmm.
because I know that you do so much with ZBrush too, is like
Yeah.
this was a big one for me in finding a new joy was the ZBrush. And it was more, I loved making things in ZBrush then I started, but then that I decided to start using them to help with illustrations.
Mm.
So that was another, finding something you're interested in, exploring it, finding a passion, sitting there and, delving into, the depths of whatever, this was another, it was another kind of renaissance of the idea of art. And, so it was for the illustrations, but it was also for the process of making in 3D,
Mm-hmm.
and that was important. So it was. I just thought I didn't know. It was one of those things that you guys are so involved with. I'm not like the best. Oh, I do okay, but it's more for the reference and well, there was the waves and stuff.
Oh, cool.
For her.
Yeah.
These things, putting them together, you can maybe recognize some of the illustrations, and playing around. So it was another experiment in playing around, because this is actually the tractor pieces, and then playing around with certain rendering and certain stylistic effects that way, leading to other ideas of things that these grouping of deers and the cartoon shader and key shot, and playing with transparency and overlap is leading to other things and ideas for me for personal work as well. And these are like also references for professional work. The sideshow toys, the Scientific American, things from me,
Yeah.
etc. So that was, I just to throw that in terms of that exploration of, always, it's there's always something on the horizon.
That's amazing. It's wonderful to see that. And it actually makes me wonder about your compositions, like how you start to develop, what's the process for developing these? Because some of these compositions that you have are just very unique and there's a strong abstract, there's a strong shape presence to them.
It is, I love composition, so it's thinking a lot about the flow of the placement, the flow, and the way the eye moves around. It's actually not that literal as I'm doing it. It's more like I start sketching and developing and putting things down, and as they can. I don't know I'm sorry, I don't remember what our schedule was, and I don't mean to go over on you guys or anything.
Nope,
So,
all good.
but the thumbnails. So I do have some of these thumbnailing process, which is, you're not going to nail down the composition completely in a thumbnail, but you're getting an idea of, placement and shape. But they're mostly just for me to read. These are all sketchy thumbnails.
Oh, hold on, guys.
And then
Oscar, you got to mute. Keep yourself muted, Oscar. Thanks.
And so some of them are very sketchy, and some with a little bit of computer stuff added in, and then later on I'll develop some more computer stuff. And so, but I'm still, you're just seeing these things as individuals, but all of it is like, move this here, make this bigger, make this smaller, change this angle on that, because there's an intuitive feel to, but the intuitive comes from practice and doing things. And but so I'm just constantly kind of adjusting, and that's why I love playing and with just value, because it is just about the core essence of shape and value, and that all becomes components of composition from the get-go.
Yeah.
These are the explorations, all for one particular cover. Now, I don't normally do this many, but this one had a bunch of explorations. And then you hit on a certain idea that could lead to another idea, where this Barker character with the burning footprints and on the hill, and then the factory building that plays a role in the background, but then switching that, and there he is, kind of this idea of the big hill and the factory on top, and him him at the bottom, the way he's, would it be, you can really tell, but burning footprints and other kinds of things maybe ghosted into the landscape. Changing those things in terms of overlap, move the horizon line down. These are all things that I'm doing on purpose. I'm like, well, maybe if I make the factory bigger and move the horizon line down, and I can have the Barker character a little bit bigger and overlap, more of the building and maybe go into the sky. And so thus going to this, so moving it around and, micro adjusting, foot, the trail, the burning footprints, his pose. I mean, then I would work on his pose a bit, or the shape of the buildings in the factory, because that's all important. That the idea of mirroring shapes, like this is like the path, the footpath going off this way, but then also the smoke trails going off that way. But that, I don't do that right on purpose in the beginning. I might start with something and then you feel like something needs to go in a certain direction. It's probably because intuitively you're seeing other stronger directional forces, and mirroring would be better than the same. Like if it went in an angle up and to the right and this one in an angle up and to the right, it might just feel kind of static.
Yeah.
So again, still, working it out. What's his pose? Variations on that. And that was the finished piece. So that process of and I'm sorry, I went off a tangent. Your original question was about developing the composition, and it develops through the piece too. I would have changed up, even though there'd be a black and white of this version that I'm not showing here. They were close, but not exactly this version. But it changed. Like the building would have changed a little bit. The sky, the smoke changed. His hand or the lighting on him, or maybe the scale of him for sure would have changed. Probably I would have made him. Maybe he was too small, so I decided to make him bigger. That will all change, even during the process of the more advanced process of adding color in. Nothing is set in stone. And whatever's going to look better and feel better, it's still plastic throughout.
That's awesome. Yeah, that answers the question quite well. All right, guys. Well, I think we got everybody's questions answered. So you guys know the drill. I'll put this up on the Guild, or I think it's actually broadcasting there. Leave me a note. Let me know one thing that you really picked up out of this, and we can let Jon know what that one is as well. So just leave a comment down below the video. Jon, again, man, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you guys for inviting me. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Okay,
and great questions.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Well, take care of yourself.
Okay, you too.
All right. See you guys.